Hello, I'm Ryan, and welcome to my channel Analyze This, Mr. Bond, where I discuss the adventures of James Bond 007 and dig for what lies beneath the surface. Today, the Wall Street Journal reported about the stalemate over Bond 26. It seems that Eon Productions and Amazon are in a bit of a tenuous state regarding the future of the James Bond series. I'm not going to recap the Wall Street Journal article for you. I will link it in the comments so you can go ahead and read it for yourself. There's a lot of detail in there. But regardless of how you feel about the specific anecdotes in that article and how it paints the various parties there, it's been clear that there's a sort of cultural clash between Eon Productions and how they want to be able to make Bond films and what Amazon's expectation for the Bond series is. And that's resulted in a lack of trust, I would say, between the two parties. That's certainly the picture that I get from that article. And I wanted to respond to that article in real time because I think in a moment of real bitterness on behalf of some of the Bond community, especially the portion of the Bond community which really responded negatively to No Time to Die and where that left the character, there's a tendency to jump to judgment, to just follow the emotion. And I think it's important to put this in a broader industry context. The film industry is changing aggressively. It's a much different animal now than it was even just 5 years ago. And you're seeing filmmakers across the board really struggle to adapt to it. I mean, we've seen things like Christopher Nolan's well-established relationship with Warner Brothers just completely fall apart. We've seen Warner Brothers do things like shelve practically completed movies just for tax write-off purposes. We've seen directors get into tiffs with these bigger studios because of the fights over whether their films are going to get theatrical exhibition or not. We're seeing streaming companies struggle with the fact that it's more expensive than ever to make films and to give them theatrical releases. So the overhead involved in a theatrical release is oftentimes not particularly profitable. And then there's the whole engine behind the streaming industry and the way that it prioritizes subscriptions that shifts the nature of content. We've seen this play out across every lane. Everything has been impacted by it. And we're at the moment where that's really caught up to James Bond. What you see depicted in the Wall Street Journal article is a real clash between a traditional movie-making family, the Broccoli family, who has shepherded the Bond series for years, has a very strong sense of what they think making a Bond film should look like, and have had some well-established relationships with studios over the years. The relationship in particular with Amy Pascal at Sony during the Craig era was very productive for Eon Productions. They had a strong creative unity there. And now that stable relationship between Eon Productions and the studio has been kind of thrown up in the air, and they're confronting the new landscape that the entire film industry is encountering. And it's a difficult, difficult place to be. If you take anything from what I just said, it's that the Bond series is not alone. We are seeing a dramatic shift in what movies are, how they're made, how they're distributed, how they make profit. And it's impacted pretty much every major franchise. I mean, we live in a world where a Michael Keaton Batman movie was filmed and then shelved for a tax write-off rather than release it theatrically. We live in a world where it's taken quite a long time to just get a sequel to the hit film The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson, off the ground. We're waiting till 2026 for that, and that's just been itching for a follow-up. It practically landed on a setup for a part two that we're still waiting for. Star Wars is just in a state of limbo. They keep announcing, potential movies that get pushed back, and all of these franchises are just kind of struggling and there's a real sense of unease across the entire industry. And what we're seeing between Eon Productions and Amazon sounds like just yet another symptom of a broader problem with a huge moment of transition where technology has seriously disrupted how the industry works, and a lot of the institutions of that space no longer function the way they used to. And I don't know what that means for James Bond. I had a conversation at Gatherall earlier this year about whether we'll even really have blockbusters the way we have them now in 10 years. But I do know where I stand in relationship to all franchises. And this is a perspective that I want you to understand so you understand where I'm coming from. You don't have to share this perspective because I think we're all different and we all have different preferences. But I am very much a quality over quantity guy. I wouldn't necessarily want Bond to become something like Marvel or Star Wars in its current incarnation, which is to say, a kind of content mill. I would love to see regular Bond films, but I would be honestly very depressed if Bond became something like what Star Wars has become. In many ways, I would rather have had no Star Wars after the prequels than what we have had. And that's just my personal opinion. I grew up loving Star Wars. I was a diehard Star Wars fan, but just seeing it become just another movie series has been deeply demoralizing to me. And I deeply fear that the same thing could eventually happen to James Bond and probably will as the character starts to enter the public domain a little bit over a decade from now. The one thing I will say about the Daniel Craig era, which I really, in retrospect, respect as a new chapter in a long-standing series. It was a subversive chapter. It did a lot of things, but it took bold swings. It surprised me. These were gorgeous movies to look at. Those movies felt like events. They felt special. They felt distinct even from the blockbusters of their time. And that was one of the reasons I did my series on the Daniel Craig films to begin with, because I think as messy as the Daniel Craig era could sometimes be, they were special blockbusters in an era where blockbusters were starting to become more and more of a factory assembly line product. My great fear would be that Bond would become something so empty that it would effectively tarnish the legacy of the series thus far. Because I feel like that's happened with some of the other major franchises out there. As I've said, my love of Star Wars, I don't think will ever recover. So I, on one level, am glad to see that Bond is in the hands of someone who is protective of it, because I think Bond does need protecting. I am simultaneously very depressed that we are not going to see a Bond film probably in the imminent future. I think this new story confirms what a lot of us had feared, that really Bond is kind of a little stagnant behind the scenes. And I think it's going to take us a little bit to adjust to the news. And this is rough news to get right before the holidays hit. But it's news we have to process together. And what I would say, again, to all of us is to not single out Bond as an isolated phenomenon. It might be the one you have the most strong emotional feelings about. But remember, the entire industry is in a kind of precarious place. And it was going to catch up to Bond sooner or later. It happened to be sooner. And I think we just have to wait and see what happens here. Because unless you're really like Christopher Nolan, who has the cachet to just kind of, without studio interference, just go off and create whatever you want to create, it's really hard to insulate a film of the budget size of Bond from all these external market forces. And I think that's where Bond is. And it's a tough pill for us to swallow. And I Encourage you to just sit with it, process this news, read through the article, and we'll all process this together. I'll be there talking with you all in the comments on this video. As always, I'll catch you in the next one.